Good evening, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, buenos dias, buenas tardes. I guess it depends where you are. Thank you for joining our latest Alborada online. My name is Nick MacWilliam. I am a co-editor of Alborada. Alborada, if you haven't seen any of our events or visited our website before, it is an independent media platform designed to give a progressive perspective on issues around culture, politics, media in Latin America. Founded, well, we've been going for about 12 or 13 years now, and as well as physical events, we do online events, publish lots and lots of articles, and much more. We have a sister platform, Alborada Films, through which we release our own documentaries, so please do check that out as well. I'm sure at some point some of these links will be posted in the chat. So welcome to the event, Analysing AMLO. As I'm sure you are aware, AMLO is, of course, the Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. AMLO was elected in 2018 at a time when it seemed as if the left was kind of on the ropes in Latin America. If we think back to that time, just in the preceding 2.5 years, we'd had the election of Macri in Argentina. We'd had the campaign against the Workers' Party government in Brazil, the parliamentary coup against Dilma Rousseff, the campaign of persecution against Lula da Silva and his jailing. We'd had the right had been reinvigorated in Colombia through the rejection of a peace agreement there, which the far right led, the election of Lenin Moreno in Ecuador, which had shifted that country far to the right. So I think when AMLO was elected, it really brought a sense of relief, perhaps, to the regional left, and perhaps set in stone this, what we've seen today has been a wave of victories across the continent, or not set in stone, but set in motion, perhaps. So obviously, there's a huge amount of ground to cover with Mexico, what with it being such a big country, having such an important history, such a diverse culture, political culture. So I'm really, really delighted to that we've got 4 speakers who are joining us today. I think we're still waiting for the 4th. So I'll just briefly tell you who our speakers are. So firstly, we're going to have Étienne von Bertrab, who is a Mexican lecturer at University College London, a director of Alborada, Mexico's Geography of Hope. Sounds very similar to Alborada, but this is something different. And Étienne is also a columnist in Pie de Página, a Mexican newspaper. We're also hopefully going to be joined by Yamel, who is a Mexican journalist, YouTuber who specializes in politics, democracy, and social demands. I believe Meme hasn't joined yet, but we're very hopeful she will. Our 3rd speaker will be David Raby, retired professor in Latin American studies and author of Democracy and Revolution, Latin American Socialism Today, through Pluto Press. And our 4th speaker is Violeta Vázquez Rojas, who is a Mexican linguist, researcher, columnist, and a doctor in linguistics at New York University. So the way it's going to work, each of our speakers will have around 5 to 8 minutes to give a presentation around a topic of their choosing. And then we will potentially have 1 or 2 questions from myself, and of course, then open it up to the audience. You are welcome to post your questions in the chat. You can also message me if you would like me to read your question out. And if you would like to ask the question yourself on the on camera, then just drop us a message in the chat. Drop me a message internally in the chat below, and yeah, we can make that happen. Of course, as well, most importantly, well, not most importantly, but very importantly, Alborada is a completely independent media platform, really trying to create space to talk about Latin America. I'm sure media will come up tonight, and I know that there was Étienne posted something very interesting around the Guardian's coverage of AMLO. Surprise, surprise. That's always the same names that crop up with these things. So do support independent media where you can. It's really important to create these spaces where we can debate in an honest, open, fashion to try and, you know, help improve our understanding and other people's understanding of what's taking place in Latin America at this kind of extraordinary time in the continent. So without further ado, I'm going to invite our first speaker to take to the stage. Étienne, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nick, and also Pablo Navarrete, who is somewhere behind, and all the team at Alborada. To my colleagues in this panel and for the audience for being here, I truly believe we can all learn something valuable today. So it's not exactly a topic of my choosing. I was asked to actually give some background into how AMLO came to power and what is this fourth transformation all about. So I'll give some elements. I don't know how much everyone knows about AMLO. So for some, it might be the first part already known, but I'll give a few elements to consider. So AMLO was elected, as Nick said, in 2018 by over 30 million voters. This is 53% of the electorate, which is extraordinary in a country where we don't have second round. I'm not a historian. I'm also not part of the party Morena that he founded. But I've been attentive to Andrés Manuel, as some of us refer to him, and have supported him since the desafuero in 2005. We will talk a bit about that in a moment. I sympathize with this government, which doesn't mean that I like everything or support everything or agree. But as a Mexican citizen, as an activist, I consider this a moment of possibility for transformative change that we haven't seen in a very, very long time, at least in my lifetime, and I'm not that young anymore. I'll give, again, some background to this new period, and it's not that new. We've been 4 years out of 6 of the sexenio, and highlight some aspects that could be relevant for the discussion. Regarding AMLO, for short, he started his political life in the state of Tabasco, where he later went to Mexico City, studied at UNAM, political sciences and administration, and he was, as many remind him in a negative way, affiliated at first with the PRI, Partido Revolucionario Institucional, which of course dominated Mexico, ruled Mexico for more than 70 years, 11 presidencies. And so that's kind of a negative association, but he very soon departed from the mainstream PRI. He joined something called the Corriente Democrática that opposed the imposition of Carlos Aníez de Gortari as candidate, and later became the Frente Democrático Nacional, which is a coalition of less parties that supported Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas and that were not happy of the neoliberal turn of the government of then Miguel de la Madrid, which of course would be furthered by Carlos Aníez de Gortari. He later became jefe de gobierno, like the mayor of Mexico City in 2000, in parallel with Vicente Fox, the right-wing conservative president that we have. That period was called Alternancia Política. And of course, it was the preceding power to the party that was less confrontative or less conflicting to the status quo in Mexico. And because he was going to be the main or the only left candidate with possibilities of winning in the 2006 elections, he was attacked in a very egregious way by PAN and by the elite, tried to stop him from being candidate through the desafuero or impeachment. He then became a much more prominent or known leader throughout Mexico, and an inspiration for millions. Then came 2 periods, the period of Felipe Calderón, which we all know. He won by less than 1% of the vote, thanks to the unlawful involvement of the president and the Mexican oligarchy. Those were the years where the campaign started, López Obrador es un peligro para México. And these ideas have resonated for a very long time. The legacy of Calderón, we know, hundreds of thousands of killings, tens of thousands of disappeared people, the normalization of violence in everyday life. He attempted again in 2012 with a PRD to be president. Peña Nieto won the election, and as soon as the PRD shifted also towards a neoliberal thinking, he left the PRD, and that became obvious with Pacto por México. Then the PRI, PAN, and PRD formed a bloc. That party, PRD, is now a bloc, is a satellite of the others, but that is another story. For the third attempt, and we'll follow these elements, he ran with the Movimiento de Regeneración Nacional, later founded as Morena as a party, but was initially a civil association. And that is Morena. Morena is only 8 years old and has become the major political force in Mexico. It has had significant wins in every subsequent election, including 11 governorships in 2011, 3 more this summer. It now governs 20 out of 32 states and is likely to win 2 more in 2023. And unless something extraordinary and dramatic happens, it will win again the presidency of 2024. What happened in that year was a peaceful democratic revolution. The conditions were such in a country that many of us believe that it could have led to a much more violent process. But again, the leadership of López Obrador cannot be understood without 3 decades of crossing the entire country, receiving demands, listening to grievances of people in its more than 2,400 municipalities. In my opinion, is that there is no politician or otherwise alive that knows more about the country, which doesn't mean that he doesn't have blind spots, of course. He has written 18 books, mostly about Mexican history, and his vision of the country was translated into something called Proyecto de País, the project for the country, that was subjected to the elections in 2018. So people voted for AMLO, but people also voted for his project. Once in power, and I'll finish very soon, he referred to this moment as the fourth transformation, which I'm sure we will discuss, in which he wanted to root electoral and direct democracy practices, attack endemic and widespread corruption, depart from the neoliberal economic model. This is something that, of course, is very has a lot of nuances, and respond to the demands and needs of the poorest. The motto here is por el bien de todos, primero los pobres. According to Lorenzo Meyer, a Mexican historian, this fourth transformation has not offered to change really the mode of production of the regime, but something less radical, but not less important, to eliminate the aspects more damaging from the neoliberal regime. Again, fighting corruption, giving the public sector a centrality which had lost, to implement policies directed to those more affected. Now, this reformism or lack of radicalism for some, but also his political pragmatism, are the center of critiques from the left as well, including the ZLN and the Congreso Nacional Indígena, which also have opposed a large infrastructure and development project in the southeast of Mexico, such as the Tren Maya, which I'm sure we can discuss. So we are 2 years before the next presidential election. The opposition has not been able to articulate, even in broad terms, what is their alternative project, beyond superfluous mottos like Por un México Ganador. Approval rates of AMLO are extremely high, particularly after 4 years in office. This has no precedent in the country. He is ranked second in the world for acceptance of his government. And even if AMLO won't be in the ballot, as I said, Obradorismo, as it is called, is certainly here to stay. Morena has a lot of problems as a fast-growing party, has also brought old vices. And not having AMLO will be a challenge in 2024 and onwards. There is also a lot of discussion about the potential candidates being too confident, being already in the mood of campaign 2 years before, and neglecting organization and being distracted from either governing or legislating. Just a note of caution before I leave to the next panelist. It is very difficult to get a balanced understanding of Mexico. And this is mostly because of a highly biased or enormously biased media landscape. According to the Media Ownership Monitor for Mexico in 2018, 11 families controlled more than half of the most important media and most who get to the largest audiences in television, radio, and the French press. And they received more than half of the government advertisement, the famous chayote. These families made huge fortunes, and all of them are unhappy with the present government. Internationally, this also translates for different reasons. The Western media, particularly, of course, the economists who lauded Peña Nieto as the savior of Mexicans, when we all know it was the most disastrous period of recent history, and refers to AMLO as little less than a despot, and of course a populist that never fails to use that word. But even progressive media, such as The Guardian, has a lot of difficulty in giving a balanced perspective. We can also discuss a bit that later today. But I just wanted to start with that, and I'll leave that to the next panelist.
Thank you so much, Etienne. That was a really, really useful explanation, laying the groundwork for those who are new to AMLO, or those who it's always good to refresh, about the conditions that saw him finally win the presidency, although I believe he won it previously, but didn't get to take office. So I'd like to now invite our second speaker, Violeta Vázquez Rojas, who I'll just read her bio again, a Mexican linguist, researcher, columnist, and doctor in linguistics at New York University. So Violeta, are you here? I've got...
I'm here.
Yeah, hello, Violeta. Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I was not expecting this to be my turn, but thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I want to thank Nick and David for organizing, and Etienne, of course, for considering me in this panel. It's an undeserved honor. And I want to complement a little bit of what Etienne has said by talking about what AMLO calls the revolution of consciences. And I think this is a central tenet of López Obrador's project. Oddly, it's not discussed very frequently in it's not something that we discuss or reflect a lot about, although the president mentions it almost every day in his morning conference. So I would like to talk about what is the famous revolution of consciences, or how can we better understand what AMLO means by this term. Second, how is it supposed to be implemented, right? Because changing the way people think is absolutely not an easy task. So I would like to reflect a little bit on how is AMLO thinking about doing it. And the third question, I think, is it really working? Is it really a revolution of consciences underway? Is there a cultural change already in progress, or is it ever going to happen? Or that I think those are the three main questions that we should consider around this topic. Okay, so first of all, about what is the famous revolution of consciences? I think if you look up on Google revolution of consciences, it's gonna come up with a bunch of titles on self-improvement and spirituality and things like that. Well, that happened to me, at least. But this is, of course, not what AMLO means, right? He's thinking about a social conscience, a social change, a culture change that involves rethinking the values that we hold. what we consider desirable, what we consider rejectable, what should be our ethics in the long run. And about this, I think there are some main points that organize the idea of revolution of consciences that AMLO wants to bring about. The first one, but I think the main one, is the way we look at corruption. So AMLO has a completely different view on corruption. Before AMLO, in the former administrations, corruption was thought of as some individual behavior, right? Like bribing a police officer to not get fined, or bribing a public server to get your paperwork done easier. Well, that was what people considered was corruption. And AMLO has insisted that corruption is actually a system. And it's a system that has as its central objective the privatization of public goods. So privatizing what is public, that is corruption. And that is it's like the central core, well, central core, I'm sorry for the redundancy, but that's the core of neoliberalism, right? As a cultural project. And so under neoliberalism for AMLO, governments cannot be democratic because by definition, their only purpose is to enable privatization and therefore corruption. So the way we view, we think of corruption is what is going to let us first reject it as a principle, right? Like no one wants that system anymore. And second, to work in order to, how do you say, to expel it from our daily lives and our daily behaviors. So I think that's the central topic in AMLO's culture change. And the second would be democracy, right? So AMLO has a completely different conception of democracy, very simple, very faithful to the etymology of the word. And I say this because he repeats it almost like every other day. So for him, democracy means nothing but the power of the people, like being really almost literal about it. And that means he doesn't have this idea of liberal democracy as a system of counterbalances and where all minorities are represented, and that in the bottom always manifests a certain fear for the majorities, right? So what AMLO has also brought about as a culture change is the respect for the will of the majority. And the majority, or the people, has become a central political actor in his administration. Now, I wanted, there's more points we can elaborate later, but I want to go to the second question: how is it implemented? And I think that for AMLO, just as the cultural project of neoliberalism was implemented and was like ingrained in our brains and in our ways of living through propaganda, right, and through the mass media, well, AMLO has this asset that is his morning conference, in which he lectures every day about the new ethics of this society. We can go about the morning conferences. I'm pretty sure that Meme has a lot to say about it because she's an expert in AMLO's morning conferences. And third, just so that I won't go over my time, has it worked? And how do we know, right? One of the reasons why we don't discuss culture change or revolution of consciences very much is because the opposition usually mocks this term. They think that, oh, this is just like some of his grandiose projects. It's never going to happen. No one can change the way that people think in just 3 years and this and that. So they don't think that this is actually on the way. And I think, and the other criticism is, how are we going to measure, right? Like, if you're a technocrat and you want to have every social change being measurable, how do you measure that there has been some cultural or some ideological change? And I think that a rather amusing way I find of confirming that there is some culture change underway is that it's in insults. Like the the words, the vocabulary that the opposition uses to insult, supporters of López Obrador has changed radically. They don't use racist or classist epithets anymore, because then it goes back against them. And so they use words like elitists. Like, it turns out now that supporters of López Obrador, we are elitists, or we are authoritarian, or so they use these words that López Obrador has actually coined in the vocabulary of this culture change. And by vocabulary, I mean just a list of words, but a system of categories that help us organize our political reality. And finally, I would just like to stress that even though they would say, oh, it's impossible that AMLO is going to bring about a culture change in only 3 years or 4 years or 6 years or what have you, that's hilarious, that's ridiculous. I think that, well, the thing is not that because AMLO won the election, there's going to be now a culture change or a revolution of the consciences. It is exactly the other way around. It is because there was a gradual, sometimes imperceptible culture change and revolution of conscience and a new system of values that came to a certain tipping point in that July of 2018 that AMLO is president now. So those would be the two things I have to say about whether culture change or revolution of consciences has actually been brought about with Obradorismo. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Violeta. A really, really fascinating overview of the cultural shifts occurring under AMLO. And of course, that breaking away from neoliberalism is also about changing people's thought processes, about convincing people that an alternative is possible, and one that, of course, so many different governments in Latin America have embarked on, are trying to embark on, and with relative degrees of success. But of course, the forces pushing back, the pro-neoliberal forces pushing back against that fracture are, of course, very, very powerful. And how these governments navigate and maintain their autonomy and can actually fulfill their programs to the people who elected them is one of the great, great challenges, not only in Latin America, but in many parts of the world. But where Latin America really does seem to be kind of leading the way in a global context. So I would like to now invite our third speaker, David Raby. Really, really delighted to have David here. David is a retired professor in Latin American studies. He also publishes regular articles in the Morning Star, a British newspaper. And he's the author of Democracy and Revolution, which I actually happen to have right here, Latin America and Socialism Today. Grab yourself a copy if you haven't read it. It's a really, really good and important book. So thank you, David. And yeah, please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Yes, and I want to start by expressing heartfelt gratitude to everyone at Alborada for organizing this landmark event. 4 years after the great election victory of AMLO and the Morena party, it is very important to have this discussion in UK progressive media of its significance for Mexico and Latin America. I'm going to start with a number of basic facts which will seem elementary to specialists, but of which many activists and educated observers are unaware through no fault of their own. First, the sheer size and importance of Mexico. It has a population of 130 million, second in Latin America only to Brazil with 215 million, and 2.5 times that of number 3, Colombia, with 52 million. In territory, it's 8 times the size of the UK, somewhat smaller than Argentina, and of course only a quarter the size of Brazil, but still a very big country. And this after the US seized more than half of its original territory in 1848. Size isn't everything, and there are very good reasons to insist on solidarity with the heroic resistance of small nations like Cuba and Nicaragua. But in the big picture, Mexico is of enormous regional importance. The second aspect I want to emphasize is the actual record of AMLO's government. Before we can analyze, we need to know what he and Morena have actually done. In terms of benefits, he introduced truly universal public pensions for the first time, incapacity benefit, apprenticeships for young people, grants and scholarships at all levels of education, school maintenance budgets run by local communities, massive investment in healthcare to create a true free universal system, a Mexican NHS, and low interest or interest-free credits for small businesses. With regard to labor rights, we have above inflation increases in the minimum wage every 6 months for the first time in 30 years. Supervised free union elections to banish corruption. Strict limits on subcontracting and an end to hire and fire. On national control of resources, we have energy sovereignty with restoration of public oil company Pemex, which was being sold off by previous neoliberal governments, restoration of public control of electricity, and nationalization of lithium, of which Mexico has large deposits in Sonora State. A joint battery company is being established with Bolivia. Then we have public works, a new Mexico City airport built at 1/3 of the price and with much less environmental damage than the one projected by the previous government. Railways, above all the 1,500-kilometer Tren Maya, which loops around the Yucatan Peninsula in the southeast, bringing enormous benefits to that neglected region. Built largely along a pre-existing but abandoned track, it will combine express passenger services with tourist trains stopping at archaeological sites and budget services with frequent stops for locals and also freight trains. I will say no more, but leave it to Étienne, who is an expert on the subject. Then we have the environmental record. There is this project of Sembrando Vida, Sowing Life, a huge agroforestry program for peasant farmers, promoting reforestation. There are many new ecological parks, and the biggest solar power installation in Latin America in the Sonora Desert. But most interesting is how AMLO pays for all of this. He declared he would not raise taxes, and he has not. But all must pay their taxes in full, including the super rich and large corporations. There are no tax holidays, exemptions, or evasion. To ensure this, he reinforced the tax collection department and a special financial investigations unit of the finance ministry. He managed, for instance, to get Walmart to pay $400 million US in back taxes. You could call it tax justice. Then there is his much misunderstood program of civic austerity. As he says, you can't have a rich government with a poor people, and the root cause of Mexico's problems is corruption. So AMLO began by halving his own salary and telling all high public officials to do the same, although some have shamelessly taken legal action to retain their privileges. Also, he banned expense account lunches, luxury hotels or private jets, and luxury cars. He himself travels economy class. He dissolved the Presidential Guard. He declared war on corruption. No one will be persecuted, but all documented cases of corruption will be investigated. Benefits are paid directly to beneficiaries via a public welfare bank, making financial services available to all, even in remote areas. It already has 1,200 branches, eliminating intermediaries and corruption. The result is economic success. Much of the private sector supports him as he hasn't raised taxes. Distribution of benefits to the poor and public works investment has maintained demand. Debt has not increased, and this is crucial for keeping the markets at bay. And energy sovereignty has limited inflation. The Mexican peso has actually appreciated against the dollar. Public order is promoted by dissolution of the corrupt federal police and creation of a National Guard trained in human rights. Finally, we should note AMLO's progressive foreign policy with support for Latin American integration, reviving CELAC, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States founded by Venezuela, but which had been neglected for several years. Noteworthy is Mexico's active support for democracy in Bolivia, including saving Evo Morales' life in November 2019 during the coup. Public support for Cuba against the US blockade, including sending shipments of supplies and visiting the island in May 2022. But this does not exclude constructive engagement with the US on trade, migration, and justice, while expressing open criticisms and defending Mexican sovereignty. To conclude, it's worth noting that Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel has declared that if there is one fraternal country Cubans should love more than any other, it is Mexico. Also remarkable was this declaration by President Nicolás Maduro of Venezuela in July 2022, after AMLO's latest visit to Washington. He said it was, and I quote, historic, the solid, clear, diplomatic, firm position of the Mexican leader, a position of dignity, which we recognize publicly and applaud, of the President of Mexico, the President of dignity, the President of truth. Well, that's pretty categorical. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, and really, really fantastic contribution. And as was posted in the chat, please make sure to check out David's book. Now, we have a non-advertised speaker who's about to join us. I'm just trying to find you in the chat to maybe the tech can give the microphone to Laura. Jeremy Corbyn is with us, I believe. Big supporter of AMLO. And Jeremy, yeah, if we can get the microphone on and the camera to you, please, you are welcome to take the floor.
Lovely, thanks. It wasn't allowing me to unmute ourselves.
Right,
first of all, big thank you to David for what he just said and his phenomenal knowledge of Mexico, which puts all of us to shame. The only person that knows more on this call, I think, is Laura. But that was really, really good and really well said. Thank you very much. I'll be very brief. I just want to say this. Obviously, I know Andrés Manuel as a friend, and I have followed and supported his activities for a very long time. And I remember being in the Zocalo when he was denied the presidency and declared himself the legitimate president of Mexico by means of a popular vote of the million-odd people in the Zocalo at that time. I have to say, I did not vote in that election because I'm not a Mexican citizen. So there was a million hands went up, and there was mine beside my body when I waved in support of him. And obviously, I know him quite well. And I want to say thank you also to Alborada for everything you do in ensuring that we understand issues facing not just Mexico, but Latin America as a whole. And I think AMLO's long road to becoming the president was phenomenal in that he suffered the defeats, he traveled the whole country, and there is no town, no village, no community, no road he has not traveled at some point in talking about the possibilities of Mexico. And I treasure an afternoon I spent with him at the Open Air Museum at Villahermosa when we're talking about the archaeological history of Mexico and the artifacts that are there on display. And we discussed the fact that it was African people that first went to Mexico, not Europeans. And that can be found in the history of the country and indeed of the whole region. So it's that understanding and love he has for the history and of Mexico, which I think is so incredible. In the last discussion we had with him, after he invited me to the Manera, in January, and very kindly invited me to speak at the Monera, but very kindly didn't tell me he was going to do that, which made it all a bit of a surprise, but probably just as well for that. We had a very long discussion over breakfast, and we talked a lot about anti-poverty programs, about Mexico and Mexico's place in Latin America and the world. But he also said how he wanted one of his legacies to be that the country becomes more open to all its people, and he wanted to move out of the presidential palace and wanted to make it a palace for the people, which was open to the public in all parts at all times, which I thought would be a lovely and very generous legacy that he wants to put forward. The issues that he's faced are massive, and we reflected on that during our discussion. He's faced with massive poverty across the country, faced with large numbers of people living outside the formal economy who are just as deserving of healthcare, rights, education, housing, and all the rest of it that everybody else is. And it's how you deal with those issues. And I asked him, I said, what's the one thing you'd really most like to have? And he said, I'd love, Jeremy, if we could have the equivalent of the principles of your National Health Service in Mexico. Healthcare free at the point of need for everybody. And whilst Mexico hasn't completely achieved that yet, when we were there, we were traveling around Chiapas in January, I was impressed with the number of new health centers, new hospitals, new medical facilities that are available for the very poorest people. And that has to be the right way forward. And so I think the anti-poverty programs, the health programs, the education programs, but above all, the spirit of Mexico that he embodies, and the way in which he, for example, challenges the intellectual property ownership of maize and other things by promoting indigenous maize, the multicolored original maize that Mexico used to grow all over and now only grows in limited quantities, bring that back. And the environmental programs that he's putting forward are something that are quite incredible, and I applaud him and support him for that. But what you have to also look at are two things. One is international and the other is the problems of corruption. He's faced with a legacy of corruption, of a multiplicity of police forces that don't even talk to each other. And the simple, well, not simple, the complex issue of inquiring into one major human rights abuse, like the Ayotzinapa 43, becomes a Herculean task when you're not sure who to trust, where to trust them, and where the inquiry is going to go. And in our discussions with Encinas, I certainly raised all of that. And indeed, there's a UK parliamentary delegation in Mexico at the present time, and I've just sent them a note of information about the disappearance of Claudia Urrutia as an example of what happens when people disappear. But we're dealing with a massive abuse of human rights all across Central America, where poverty-stricken Guatemalan, Honduran women and others from other countries travel northwards to try and get to a relative place of security in the USA and suffer on the way. And so human rights abuses are rampant across the region, brought about by poverty, violence, and corruption. And AMLO has to try and contend with all of that. And he has my support and that of support of lots of us in trying to deal with all of that. And the last thing I'd say is the wider international scale. David's absolutely right to compliment Lula on his election victory. And indeed, he was almost the first president to contact Lula. We were in Sao Paulo on Sunday when Lula took a call from AMLO within minutes of being elected, saying congratulations, and wanted to work together. Wanted to work together because the countries south of the border, south of the Rio Grande, do need to work together. Do need to work together on developing a Latin American economy, changing from an extractive to a productive economy, and praising those that understand the true history of Latin America in order to empower the next generation for the future. And AMLO's crucial intervention in Bolivia when the coup took place against Evo, by sending a plane to pick up Evo and take him to a place of safety in Mexico, and then later to take him to Argentina, and finally the return to Bolivia, was wonderful, important, and actually very heroic. And so I think these are days of absolute hope in Latin America. We saw the joy on the faces of the people across the streets of Sao Paulo on Sunday night after the result was finally declared, when Lula had won by less than 1%. But that is the mood that's sweeping across Latin America. And somebody said to me, what's your message to the generation coming up? I did this at a seminar in Sao Paulo on Saturday, the day before the election. I said, make sure that every young person, every student all across Latin America reads Eduardo Galeano's Open Veins of Latin America to understand the history of the continent, but above all, to understand the possibilities and hope. AMLO gave us hope. Lula gives us hope. Our solidarity is more important than ever to bring about real social justice and political change in Mexico and all across Latin America. Thank you very much for giving me a few minutes of your time today.
Thank you very, very much for your time and for your words, Jeremy. I think there's a few of us in the UK, more than a few of us, who regret that Britain never took the opportunity to break from the neoliberal paradigm, as so many countries in Latin America have managed to do. And that's, of course, tribute to political leadership, also, of course, the huge grassroots mobilizations across Latin American society. And it does give us hope. And that's why certainly myself as a non-Latin American look to the continent and where I draw political inspiration from, and why I've been so involved with it for the last several years now. I would like to now invite our final speaker, Meme Yamel, who, just to reiterate her profile, Meme is a Mexican YouTuber and journalist who specializes on politics, democracy, and social demands. Meme, we are really, really glad to have you here, and over to you.
Well, thank you so much. I wanted to start by thanking Alborada team, Nick, and also David, Raby, for being the one who put me in touch with this wonderful crew. And also, it's an honor to hear Jeremy Corbyn. In my case, I choose to talk about democracy in Mexico because in recent days, President López Obrador presented an initiative to reform the electoral system, and this has unleashed a series of campaigns and propaganda that may confuse those who do not know how Mexican democracy really is. As already mentioned before, the conventional press and opinion leaders that serve to corporate purposes usually manipulate information to suit to the paymasters, no? And this has led to many valuable information gets lost on an international arena. And actually, those things that are worth being criticized do not get noticed as they are not in the media agenda. Therefore, that famous morning show becomes key to provide balanced information and a forum to debate with reporters. Although many of them say that it really stigmatized press, personally, I do not believe it. In contrast, it has put a spotlight on such questionable practices. But returning to democracy, as had been mentioned by those who have preceded me in this forum, for the 2018 election, Mexico experienced an unprecedented process in national democracy, and it was the victory of López Obrador with more than 30 million votes. This just after 2 previous attempts and an electoral fraud. This itself is important because no president in at least the past 30 years had managed to obtain those votes. In fact, that a single person obtained that amount of votes, which is double of what he obtained in the past processes, speaks of a citizen mobilization that led him to win in spite of the electoral arbiter. I want to make this very clear because although it is true that in Mexico we have an electoral body that organizes and processes and has been independent for the government since the 90s, it is not independent for the political and business power that dominate them. So talking about these 30 million votes to one person that make Andrés Manuel López Obrador president is really challenging the traditional political and business system in something quite important. I want to be brief in the background in order to explain you how democracy is in Mexico in López Obrador times. With the victory of Salinas de Gortari in the 80s, the Partido Acción Nacional, PAN, the rights, the neoliberalism party, negotiated with him the creation of an institution that will obey the powers that run the country, political and business powers, but will be independent, and I will quote it, independent of the government in order to give that face of autonomy and democracy to the world. Since then, the PAN, the Partido Acción Nacional, and PRI, Partido Revolucionario Institucional, and some businessmen, especially from the Copermex, have controlled the electoral system in Mexico. This translates into an electoral system that, with all the modifications that supposedly modernized it over the years, it has been unable to punish electoral fraud, illicit enrichment, or prevent politics linked to organized crime or white-collar crime for reaching public offices. The INE, el Instituto Nacional Electoral, this arbiter, this electoral system in Mexico, arguments that they only organize elections, but in reality, they have been the perfect accomplice of the political parties since their origins. They believe that only economic fines are enough to control the parties when they violate any norm. And this is something that is perfectly controlled by the businessmen who finance the campaigns and have made themselves rich with the money given to the parties and to the institute itself. To be better clear, the parties in Mexico receive approximately 5 billion pesos in a year to promote democracy. Their way of promoting democracy is to organize forums which they raise costs so the businessmen's friends can build more, withdraw the money in cash, dodge the oversight mechanism, and take a commission. Also, the way to promote democracy in Mexico has been to give away t-shirts, thermos, caps, and all kinds of promotional items with the logos of the political parties. And this is a great business. This has been a debate that has been going for years. Personally, since I work in political parties, I have been within that system, and I saw it with my own eyes. In Mexico, there is no democracy that is close to the people. There is a simulation of democracy that is sold to the highest bidder, and this has been the greatest challenge that this administration has encouraged, because people do not trust their electoral body. Hence, we have 95 million Mexicans who can vote, and the maximum that has reached in 2018 was 60 million voters. There are left kind of 40 million, 35 million people that do not participate in elections. There is an enormous apathy to participate in this administration. López Obrador has made enormous attempts to change it. We have made big steps to make referendums, to make the people choose what they want for in different topics, like the permanency of the by López Obrador itself, and how the Mexican people want to see the other presidents in jail, not in jail. It's something that has been done in this administration, but it's like baby steps. We're taking baby steps on this democracy. So much so that this last reform presented by the president seeks to adjust the electoral body to separate it from political parties and businessmen for the first time to represent really Mexicans. So when you hear that there's a movement to protect electoral arbiters, you will understand that what they are really fighting for is for the money. They risk to lose with this reform. If this reform gets approved, they are going to lose a lot and lots of money, which will be the first really reform that in 50 years really will democratize the democracy in Mexico, and it will be really modernizing. But you can hear on the international press that there is a great apathy to this reform, and that may not be actually true. The only voices that you are going to hear are voices of people that get manipulated by this press, or that actually they have interest on the money of these political parties or the money of this this electoral system within Mexico. We are years ahead, we have years to really reach to a really good democracy, to a really representative democracy that Mexican people feel free to get to vote and feel free to go to express their opinions in referendums, perhaps. But this administration has made some steps to make that, to better understand it, the importation, the real importance of this. If Mexicans do not have these political parties that represent them, if Mexicans do not have this really democratic electoral system, we cannot be able to continue with the transformation that López Obrador has begun.
Thank you very much, Meme. Again, another really excellent and interesting and, of course, useful in building our understanding of AMLO and what's underway under his government. So I can see from the chats we have got several really quite interesting questions. So I'm going to go through some of those now. I'm probably going to address a specific question to different speakers, but if any of our other speakers would like to come in on those points as well, feel free just to drop me a message or just turn your mic on and just interject, at a suitable time. So I think the first question we shall go to from the chat. Remember, if you do want to ask, if you do want to keep posting, if you do want to ask it on video yourself, that you're welcome to. But yeah, let's just in the healthy spirit of debates, let's just keep it all going that way. So I would like to direct the question. We've got a couple of questions about AMLO's relationships with certain sectors of the population, social movements, and so on. So I'd like to direct the question towards Violeta. This was a question from, excuse me, it takes a while to scroll back through. Okay, so from Natalia Stengel. So thanks for your question, Natalia. So Natalia asks, isn't the cultural shift also a result of movements like Black Lives Matters, some indigenous movements, and the feminist movement? Don't you think AMLO is in debt with the feminist movement, I guess, because at least he has been arrogant. He has been arrogant when discussing gender-based violence without consulting the team of feminists who supports him. So is that a reasonable critique? And Violeta, how would you answer that?
Thank you. Well, first of all, yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's a very fair criticism, but I have a different view. First of all, as I said, I think that this culture shift has been on the way for decades. And a very important part of it has been the indigenous movement, but not only the most visible sector of it, which is the Consejo Nacional Indígena or the Ejército Zapatista, which have been more like foes and friends with AMLO, but there's several indigenous organizations that actually support Andrés Manuel, and I think the retribution that his well, it's not, well, let's say the policy on indigenous communities that AMLO has implemented is something that is not frequently talked about, but there is a very important program about restituting land, which is the most important thing to indigenous communities, especially in the north. So I do think that the indigenous movement in general has fed this culture change for sure, but I do think that AMLO acknowledges that. Now, as for feminists and whether AMLO is in debt for his arrogance towards consulting a particular group of them, well, first of all, you can see this as a criticism if you want, but we know that AMLO is not an enthusiast of consulting experts. It's not his style. If anything, he abhors the idea of an expert, right? So he thinks more in a more organic way that, you know, things should be brought about by the will of the people. However, I do think that the feminist movement has been a very important part of this cultural shift, not necessarily led by AMLO, but more like it has converged with this democracy movement. And just to quote, even though it is one of the most criticized aspects of AMLO's policies that he is not very willing to admit himself as a feminist or to endorse the causes of feminists, I just want to point out that under AMLO's administration, and never before, abortion is legal now in 9 states. In all of these states, except for one, Morena, the ruling party, has the majority in the local congresses. So that cannot be just a coincidence. And the second piece of data I want to give is since 2000, well, right now in the country, there are 9 women who are governors of their states. Before AMLO, that was only, there had been only 4 of them. And now we have, right now, as we speak, there are 9 women governors. So to talk about parity. So I think that in the facts, AMLO has delivered. I don't think that that he's in any debt with the feminist movement. And I think actually this culture shift has enabled all these other changes to happen. Although I wouldn't say that it is AMLO's direct action, you know, but it is part of this culture shift.
Thanks very much, Violeta. I would like to direct now another question, another critique of some of AMLO's policies. This, sorry, forgive me, I'll read the question first, then I'll name who it was. This regards the situation in Chiapas with the Zapatista movement. So AMLO's, I'm going to direct this question to Étienne. AMLO's and Morena's approach to indigenous groups, so this follows on perhaps from some of what Violeta was saying. AMLO's and Morena's approach to indigenous groups like the Zapatistas is unenlightened, lacking compared to Lula in Brazil, Gustavo Petro in Colombia. In Chiapas, under AMLO, militarization has increased and projects are being forced in opposition to indigenous communities. Is there any hope for a different approach from AMLO? This conduct disappoints me, says the person who asked the question. And it's I think we should just note that AMLO, Mexican government under AMLO, is not the only progressive government which has had tensions with indigenous populations. You've seen it with Correa in Ecuador, even Morales in Bolivia, and more recently with Boric in Chile. So would you like to elaborate on this topic, please, Étienne?
Yes, of course. First of all, I'd like to show you what I have behind. It is a poster of the Consejo Indígena de Gobierno. I supported Marichuy to become at least, you know, a symbolic candidate. Many of us in the left and that have also been part of social movements and work with indigenous peoples are torn by this historic break between which has a number of factors, and I'm sure it has a lot of different versions of when and how is it that the Zapatistas completely broke with the government and vice versa. So it is not something that I treat lightly. I do need to say, however, that they don't represent the entirety of indigenous peoples, as Violeta rightly indicated. We've been studying the Tren Maya for a very long time. It's for more than 2 years. It has its controversy, its challenges. The very fact that there is no massive opposition of indigenous peoples there is a sign of that. And I think that when I respect the Zapatista movement, I respect the CNI, but when you tell that this new period led by López Obrador, he's just another capataz of the system, it's not an insult to López Obrador. It's actually an insult to the many, many millions of Mexicans, including and mostly of the poorest of Mexico, that have hope. So again, the clash has been, I think, unfortunate. I am at peace a bit with that now, because I believe that they will follow to do what they're doing, inspiring the way they are and creating, or spaces for worlds where every will fit, regardless of this government, as they have done for centuries. So again, it's not true that it is they represent the entirety of indigenous peoples. There is a lot of support there. Restorative justice programs in several indigenous peoples, as we have not seen in decades. The militarization is, of course, another kind of word that is used a lot, that needs a lot of unpacking. Unfortunately, crime is arriving to the south and Chiapas, as we have not seen before. The people in the Yucatan Peninsula, which used to be the most peaceful area of Mexico, particularly the state of Yucatan, the city of Mérida, communities are afraid of crime arriving with incoming tourism that will be propelled by the Tren Maya. So there are concerns. There's no doubt about that. And there's uncertainty about many things. But from the fieldwork that we've done, a lot of people are seeing that this government is finally paying attention to the needs of the people. The Sembrando Vida program that has been, there's a lot of things that have been said. It started in the southeast of Mexico. This program gives a salary to almost 500,000 poor peasants throughout the country. This is absolutely extraordinary, to transform their agricultural practices towards organic production so they can produce food for themselves, restore the milpa system, and produce also fruit and timber trees for the future. And they can, of course, sell their crops and the rest of it. So, the same people that when you listen to the narratives of the mega projects being, thrown into them and imposed, and you talk to some of the people, they say, well, we don't see that way. We have concerns. What will be the impact of having a station here, or this new tourist attraction, or whatever? Some are in direct opposition because they criticize the entirety of the capitalist system, which is fine. Now, comparing with Lula and with Colombia, I think is very tricky, because Petro is just starting. So when Petro says that he wants to convert Colombia, the capital of life, and tourism is a humongous element of his campaign, right? Okay, let's see how it plays out, because that tourism will require infrastructure, roads, the rest of it, no? And the tensions will come with people that live in those territories. So, and again, we saw those tensions before. So I don't think that it's easily resolved. I only can say that I don't treat it lightly, that I respect and try to understand as much as possible. And I don't like the creating or fueling the antagonism, but it requires a lot of nuances, as with the feminist movement. That is, I think there's a lot of misunderstandings, again, replicated by people and collectives very loyal to the Zapatista movement throughout the world. But but that loyalty sometimes needs a bit more also self-critique to understand the reasons why people in Mexico, the majority in the South, have hope. They elected 2 governors already for Morena in the same region of the Tren Maya since he's in power. So it's where the revocación de mandato, you know, he was subjected to the revocation of mandate. And in the Southeast, you know, the absolute majority wanted him to continue his term. So it is, yeah, it is, there's no easy way to put it. For us, it's painful, but I believe it's not that true.
Thanks, Etienne. I believe that David would like to come in and add something. So David, please go ahead.
Thanks, Nick. Yes, just briefly. I think a lot of people have had contact with Zapatistas, and the Zapatistas have had a very big impact internationally. They were a very interesting movement in Chiapas, in a certain zone of Chiapas, and they continue there, but they do not represent, as has been stated, all of the indigenous people of Mexico, far from it. I'll just mention briefly, there was a brief mention by Etienne, but the case of the Yaqui people in Sonora, in the far northwest, that AMLO said were the most abused of all native peoples. That's debatable, but it's certainly, you can make a very strong case for it. AMLO has, over the past 3 years, made 3, he's been there many times, but he has made 3 systematic visits with all of his cabinet to spend time with those people, developing what he calls the justice plan for the Yaqui people, which is now being implemented, which involves returning 30,000 hectares of land to them, irrigation works, new schools, clinics and hospitals, schools and a university in the native Yaqui language. So it's a complete plan for those native people. He has since done the same with several other smaller native groups. So I think we need to consider the indigenous question in the round.
Thanks for that, David. And I think I'm probably going to, well, there's been a couple of comments in the chat. People would like to hear your views on the, of course, so much of what we've heard about Mexico, so much of the media focus in the last, well, since 2006 really, has been on the very violent situation in many regions of the country connected to the drugs trade. Estimates of around 300,000 people killed in that time, many more disappeared, forced from their homes. Of course, it's a reality that any political actor in Mexico and beyond Mexico, because of course this spills across borders, is one they have to deal with, as well as the migration situation coming up through Central America, through Mexico, trying to reach the United States. How has AMLO addressed these major humanitarian issues? Are the criticisms fair? And what underpins these kinds of policies, and how is his government looking to basically address what are extremely difficult and complex challenges? So I'm giving that question back to you, David.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, I think some of the other speakers might have something to say on this, but
of course, after you, I would welcome further comments, as we do on every question, right. And then we'll have some time to look ahead to the future afterwards as well. Right.
Well, obviously, the history for at least 30 years of the presence of organized crime, drug cartels, and so on in Mexico is an enormous problem. And it's something which is shared. The situation is not exactly the same, but certainly shared by Colombia, for instance, and by, in varying degrees, by several other Latin American countries. And in the Mexican case, there's no question that the demand for drugs from the United States above all, and also Europe, combined with a political culture of endemic corruption in Mexico, created well, a situation which was ideal for the spread of organized crime and violence. And it was only made worse by the policies, well, particularly of the former right-wing PAN president, Felipe Calderón, in the early 2000s, who declared, well, the war on drugs, and who, in collaboration with the United States and unconstitutionally inviting armed US agents into Mexico, encouraged the Mexican military, more or less ordered the Mexican military to attack the drug cartels with extreme violence. And of course, the result of this was that an awful number of innocent people were killed. And of course, it's then come out that Calderón's own head of security, Garcia Luna, was in cahoots with the Sinaloa cartel. And it was a corrupt arrangement to attack other cartels while allying with the most powerful of them. Well, this situation led to an escalation of violence across the country, and AMLO had to begin to deal with this, which is extremely difficult. He has, by establishing a new National Guard trained in human rights, and by insisting that the solution is not to send military or police in with all guns blazing, but on the contrary, to seek peaceful solutions and to develop a culture of peace throughout the population. And to do this also, of course, by social policies, so that young people, young men especially, are not driven into crime as the only alternative to get ahead. So this is the policy. It is. There are signs it's beginning to have a positive effect, but it's extremely difficult.
Thank you, David. Does any of our other speakers want to elaborate on either of these points? Yes, please, Étienne.
Just in the issue of migration, which is, of course, one of the most complex and challenging situations, not only in that part of the world, but also in Europe with its incoming immigrants. And so it is one of the things where I believe, like from the perspective, at least, a narrative of some in the Zapatista movement, for instance, the Tren Maya is a project it's a wall to stop migration, to do the favor to the United States and bring this border down. Well, it is strange that that creating opportunities for people is considered a wall, right? Because the only way to allow people to remain in their communities is where they don't suffer violence or dispossession, or they have opportunities to educate, for education, for existing, and so on. So it's one of these areas that is quite tricky. And I believe AMLO, with what the government is doing in the southeast of Mexico, has way more potential to creating opportunities, not only for Mexicans in that region, but also for Central Americans, so that it becomes less attractive to cross the country and face, of course, the chances of not even arriving to the border with the US, and then facing, of course, deportation and whatnot. So it is, again, there are different narratives at play, but it is tremendously complicated for Mexico, of course.
Okay, thanks, Étienne. So I hope that people have found all those answers useful. Unfortunately, we won't have time to go through every single question that's in the chat. Really, really brilliant questions, I've got to say. But I would like to now ask a question to Meme. Now, looking ahead, okay, you know, Mexico has general election in 2024. Presidential terms are 6 years in Mexico. They're quite long terms, but presidents cannot stand for re-election. So AMLO cannot be president again. So this takes us to the next question. Apologies again. I made a note of the question, but I will have to go back to check the name. Is there any outstanding candidate emerging yet in Morena for the next election, or from the right-wing opposition? You know, looking ahead, who can we think is a likely challenger in 2024? And what role could AMLO still play in his post-presidency, given the strict one-term limit in Mexico? Devoting more time to politics, like Jeremy's mentor, or running for some other post? That would be Tony Benn, perhaps. Anyway, I'm not sure, but yeah, over to you, Meme. So for 2024, again, if the other speakers want to add a comment on the end, we are running short on time though for the other speakers, and obviously we'd like to hear from Meme and also potentially address one or two final points before wrapping up. So over to you, Meme.
Okay, great. Actually, there are five. There are five profiles of Morena. Morena, the party that founded Andrés Manuel López Obrador, but at least three are their favorites. They are the head of the government of the Mexico City, that is Claudia Sheinbaum, the foreign minister, Marcelo Ebrard, and the secretary of Gobernación, secretary of the Interior, Adán Augusto López Hernández. From the right wing, there are dozens. But actually, anyone who has a speech against the president is already considered a candidate, like the president of the Electoral Institute himself. The problem for the right wing is that they have to reach to an agreement. Through these 3 years, they have only managed to lose elections and even split up more. As far as AMLO is concerned, what he has said is that he's going to retire completely from politics. Practically, he plans to disappear even from social media networks and do not get to influence even as an advisor or political leader of the party he has founded. This has generated a lot of mixed feelings among the voters, among his voters. Millions ask him to get reelected. They want to transform the constitution and open up to elections so Andrés Manuel López Obrador gets reelected, but he has said no as many times as possible. And again, since that option is not on the menu, well, pues Andrés Manuel López Obrador has been like really truth about it. The other kind of the people, other voters of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, ask him to continue as a leader of Morena, no? or to tell them where to go or who to vote. Basically, we see that there are a lot of people who are looking for an opinion or a guidance from Andrés Manuel López Obrador, but he has said no. So in spite of what I want or what we think it could happen, Andrés Manuel has been really emphatic on saying, I'm going to leave. No, this is my last time and I'm leaving. So get ready. He's practically telling everybody to get ready to vote, to participate. Therefore, the importance of democracy in Mexico, because if people do not participate, a lot of things that Andrés Manuel López Obrador has done in his administration could be in risk because of thankful of the political interests of the people that had always ruled the country. And I meant the entrepreneurs or the businessmen or the money, no? So we have a lot yet to come. In 2024, it is going to be an interesting scenario for everyone, because it's when we are going to decide what is or where are we going with this transformation. The right wing really has no options of winning in this election. I cannot tell, like, therefore, but in 2024, they had no options. Even though they have dozens of candidates, there is no one that we can tell is the strong one or is the one they are getting to elect. They are not getting any better. They are not even getting to an agreement on politics, on initiatives. They're splitting up. But in the Morena side, in the political party of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, there are three people that may have the sympathy of the people, but one has, they are different kind of transformations. No, Claudia Sheinbaum, it's recognized, and Reuters, the media agency Reuters, just published that Claudia Sheinbaum may be the favorite of Andrés Manuel López Obrador. He has said no. He said that Claudia Sheinbaum, Marcelo Ebrard, and Adán Augusto are their brothers and her sister, and that he's going to vote for the one, and he's going to vote and support the one that the people support. So he is letting the people to support and letting the people to get to participate and letting the people to reach who they want to be the next one in the chair of the Mexico presidency. So he's calling for another citizen mobilization. He's calling for another mobilization of the people to decide and choose which transformation route are going to reach for, and that's the scenario for 2024. It's a little tricky, therefore.
Thank you, Meme. Yeah, I think politics being a little tricky is the kind of the understatement of the modern era, because it's certainly the case here as well. All right, then. So we've got just a few minutes left, and Alborada is independent media, largely founded by my colleague Pablo Navarrete, because getting reliable information on Latin America is so complicated. There are corporate interests, always have their own interests, which are promoted first. As independent media, we try to put out regular content. These talks are a massive part of that. I can see Pablo has just posted our newsletter link in the chat. Do subscribe to our newsletter to get regular updates on what we're doing, articles we've published, and information about upcoming events. And also, we are 100% independent, so please do support where you can. We do make these events free, but there is a donation option, and through regular support, financial support allows us to expand and create that platform for reliable information and getting brilliant speakers like everyone who we've heard from tonight. So please do support, and please do subscribe to our newsletter. For our final point, and apologies to those questions that we haven't had time to touch on, but the media is always so dominant and in our lives. I would like to just bring to your attention a tweet that Étienne posted a couple of days ago. Or was it yesterday? So just bear with me. I will share it right here. Okay. Can everyone see that? A tweet from The Guardian, according to Étienne. Before I just ask Étienne to unpack this tweet a little bit, what The Guardian was saying, I would like to first turn to Violeta and ask Violeta if she'd like to just explain. We've got to be quite brief here because we're short on time. But AMLO's relationship with the media in Mexico and how he's managed to navigate that, because we've heard how the business establishment is very much opposed to him. How has he managed to navigate that? I'd also like to hear from Meme, who runs the Mexico News, who founded the Mexico News, the role of independent media in Mexico today. And then I'll come back to David and to Étienne to describe the Western media, such as The Guardian, our liberal, that some people still consider to be on the left of the political spectrum, but recent years and beyond have shown us that's not always necessarily the case by some degree. So yeah, I'd like to just, and if I just ask people to just give it, 1 or 2 minutes, because as I say, we're running short on time. If I could invite Violeta to just give some reflections on AMLO's relationship with the media, with the Mexican commercial media, and how he has navigated that and you know, managed to push back against some of the kind of negative propaganda that any progressive leader inevitably faces.
Yes, well, just 2 words about that. I think one of the main points in AMLO's project that we all talk about is the division between political power and economic power, right? But also, maybe we talk about this less often, I think one of the central signs of AMLO's project is breaking with the political power, with the media, with the mediatic power. And this has, you can see it every day. AMLO is one of the most popular presidents in the world. Well, he always claims he's the second one. But you have to take into account that this is with all the corporate media against him. Like, there is no single corporate media outlet that supports AMLO overtly, not a single one. All the media that support AMLO are independent or just emerging, or, you know, like on platforms like YouTube and that, like non-formal corporate news outlets. So that is something you have to take into account when you think about the popularity of AMLO. So he's like in 67% with all the media against him. And I think the most obvious way he has to counter, you know, to confront the media is his famous morning conference. So the morning conference is what has had his, you know, like he doesn't only refute fake news, he also gives lessons on history so that it won't repeat, you know, we won't repeat our mistakes. He also gives lessons on ethics. He gives, so everything that he sets the agenda for what, you know, what the media are going to talk about is what AMLO said at 7 a.m. that day. That's going to be the public conversation, and that's every day. So I think that's what he did, is he just switched, you know, the monopoly of communication. He just transferred it to his mañanera, and that has been a very powerful tool that we hope continues in other administrations, because it has been invaluable to counter-arrest, you know, propaganda.
Thanks, Violeta. And if I could just ask Meme to come back in to discuss briefly. As I said, we've only got like a couple of minutes per speaker now. But if you could just kind of discuss the role of independent media in Mexico today, and what role, or AMLO's relationship or the Morena relationship in that area.
Well, first, I just want to make one comment about militarization, because I saw it on the chat. Actually, the problem is that we can get the military off the streets because we don't have a police force that can take over yet. The National Guard is the one that is going to take that role but the elements that are going to replace the armed forces are just graduating. However, it is not a scenario we love. The armed forces give more confidence to the population than the police does. Another important thing is that governors have historically avoided their responsibility to strengthen the police. And on the other hand, the prosecutors, officers, actually, well, they don't do the job correctly. No, they investigate the crimes and they are saturated. They do not use the resources and the power in an adequate way to build up investigation files, which has greatly hindered the investigation of the crime. So I want just to answer of that one. And about the press, well, that is another story. We do have freedom of speech in Mexico, and that is something that has been mistaken on the media speech. The morning show, or las mañaneras, as we call them, are this forum where we can ask the president stuff and he actually answer us. And this is amazing because in Mexico, we don't have that possibility before. Before you have to be in a great media and you have to be like a famous person to reach to the presidents, and you actually had to be paid with the people's money to be like considered in the medias. So independent in times of Peña Nieto, Calderón, in times of Vicente Fox or Cedillo, Salinas, and ahead, it's actually not true. We can speak about free speech in those administrations. We can speak about to actually get to the presidents to answer us, because there were many rules to get to reach them. If you want to know something about government, you need to go to answer and system, and you need to want to go to an office, and they have like times to answer you, and that procedure is like years. You actually, I have friends that have independent media, newspapers or of platforms, and they reach until 10 years to get one answer from the government. So now the Mañanera, this morning forum of the President López Obrador, is the space where you can go and ask him. Personally, I truly believe that the Mañaneras work because I can get there and give like people's questions. People really can reach me and tell Meme, I want to the president know something that is happening on my community. I want the president to know that there is corruption here, that there is something happening here, and I want him to help me. So I get to do my job. I get to do a brief investigation or a good investigation. So I go to that morning, to La Mañanera, and ask him the president answered us. And the president not just answer you, that he, if he has something to do about it, he asked one person of his crew to do the job. And then you can do follow-ups of that. The Mañanera is the most powerful thing that López Obrador has. It has make this balance with the powers of the media, of these businessmen, of this money that goes through all these media sources. And he has made he makes these places like a debate forum. So actually, if you want to know something is true or not, if you want to know that if something has happened or not, you go to the Mañanera, you listen to it completely. I know there sometimes it's 3 hours of Mañanera, so it's hard. But if you listen to it, you will get the answers. You will get the answers you need. Sometimes you, like they say before, you get like historic details. You get like a class of history that in Mexico is really needed, because information, the really get to access information isn't normal in Mexico. Mexico is waking up. Mexican people are waking up, and they are noticing things that we didn't notice before. You needed to be specialized. You needed to be someone that investigate to know stuff. But now La Mañanera is the space where you know things of the past, present, and maybe some future analysis that the president does.
Thank you, Meme. And I will just go to our final two speakers to just any final reflections. Again, just 1 or 2 minutes, because we do need to, unfortunately, wrap up soon. So I'll go to you first, David, and then I'll ask Etienne to follow.
Thanks. Well, just 2 things, really. First of all, I agree with Meme that unless something quite extraordinary happens, it looks pretty certain that Morena will win the 2024 election, which is actually in July 2024. So that it's likely that we will have a new president who will lead or continue the transformation. Exactly how, it remains to be seen. Secondly, just to say, I've just posted in the chat an announcement about something we're trying to get going, which is a Mexico Solidarity Forum here in the UK. We're not yet fully up and running, but I think with any luck in a few months we will be. And I've posted my contact details if anyone wants to get in touch. I think Étienne, for one, is also on board.
Thanks,
David. And of course, we wish you all the best with that. Over to you, Étienne.
Yeah, just a couple of things. In relation to the Mañaneras, the challenge is, of course, and I don't know if you picked this from the call with Lula. Lula told him, like, recognizing the value of Mañaneras, and he said, sorry, but I won't be doing Mañaneras. It requires a particular character, someone that has profound knowledge and charisma and the rest of it. So I don't think that it's not necessarily that the Mañaneras will continue, or at least it will never be like those of López Obrador. So that will be a challenge. And I think the question of doing something with the media landscape, doing something to really, really reinforce public media is fundamental. Still, there's work to do. In relation to the tweet, Nick, it was a story that you can read in The Guardian about how Mexico will try to lie everyone at the COP conference in Egypt about its climate commitments. In this case, it was written by Nina Lakhani. That could be anyone, really. This is something that I've been following for years, not systematically, because I got bored and tired trying to, send feedback to, in this case, Nina is not anymore correspondent, but to previous correspondents like David Agren, El Reportero, and so on, where I say, don't you think this is biased? Look at the people you interviewed, only one-sided. Where's this information coming from? This very short piece has half-truths and outer lies in its entirety to try to portray Mexico as this, whatever regressive oil, government in love with oil, and it's full of lies. The article is full of lies, but this is something I've seen in The Guardian for a long time. And you posted a link to a very important book on The Guardian, The Capitalism Conscious. So things about the framing, it absolutely says nothing about the pursuit of energy sovereignty that has been the main center of Mexican energy policy, because where we're at, and all European countries are now hoping that they could have energy sovereignty, right? But this is completely not mentioned. The title said experts say. She only interviews one expert, which is a consultant of private renewable energies and so on. And she has lies there because she says that AMLO has imposed large dams and wind farms in indigenous lands without consultation. I follow the energy topic a lot, and I am yet to find any new dam or any new wind farm that AMLO has imposed without consultations. So it's a mix of things that were in the past to the present. But this is, again, it's not about Nina. It's a systematic thing. It's shameful, and it's tiring. Once with David Agren, he got tired of me. He told me he blocked me from Twitter. He gave me as last message the message of the email of his editor of Latin America, and he says, write to him. I don't care. This is the kind of work they're asking me to do. End of conversation. So this is what I've seen from The Guardian in relation to Mexico, at least.
Thanks, Étienne. And I think we can safely say that wherever there is a progressive government in Latin America, there will be a long series of Guardian articles spreading disinformation around that government and what their achievements are and what they're trying to do. So with that, I can only say that if you do want reliable information on Latin America, to hear brilliant speakers to read fantastic articles, go to alborada.net, support our work, subscribe to our newsletter, and yeah, follow us on social media. Follow Etienne, Violeta, David, and Meme on social media. Also check out Alborada Films, where we made several documentaries about the region and other issues as well. All the information you can find by going to alborada.net. Huge thanks to everybody who attended. We've gone over time, so I really appreciate everyone's patience. Really appreciate our brilliant speakers, the time, the energy you've put into this really informative and fascinating talk. Our next Alborada Online is not planned yet, but it will be very soon. So do follow us, and all the information will be on our website. Keep supporting independent media, and everyone have a lovely evening, and thanks again. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Abrazos.
Thank you so much.
Everybody.